So, we've all seen the shocking stories across the nation. Local libraries that peddle smut to children disguised as books for kids. The smut I speak of is designed to indoctrinate innocent children with LGBT propaganda. Books with titles like It's Perfectly Normal or The Nerdy and the Dirty depict and describe sexual acts. Some books have animations that depict pro trans post operation double mastectomy scars. So obviously, these books are evil. They harm children, and they have no place in our society, period. In the city of Jonesboro, the county library there has recently come under fire for allowing books like these to be placed in the children's section. So Christian homeschoolers who use the library as a resource no longer feel comfortable allowing their children in the library because it is perpetuating evil on their kids. Now, if I handed one of these books to a child on the street, I would be committing a crime. But librarians are immune from this standard. So Senator Dan Sullivan in the Arkansas legislature is working on a bill that would expand obscenity laws and stop the sexualization of our children at taxpayer-funded public libraries. And he joins us now. Senator Sullivan, thank you so much for coming on Conservative Arkansas Media.
Thank you, Paul. Glad to be here.
It's always great to talk to you, and I really appreciate your proactivity on this. Can you kind of walk us through
Sure.
why you wanted to write this bill and address this problem?
Well, you're seeing this, as you mentioned, nationwide, and also it includes what's going on in Arkansas. This bill, Senate Bill 81, as you said, librarians, both public libraries and school librarians and school teachers, in fact, are exempt from obscenity law. Obscenity and pornography legally are two different things. So this bill would end that exemption for librarians and schools. And as you mentioned, now they will face criminal prosecution if they violate the law, just as you indicated you would if you violated the law. We are not changing the definition of obscenity. The legal definition is out there. It's been adjudicated. It's clear. It's clear what it takes to violate the obscenity law, and it's clear what materials that are available don't violate obscenity laws. For example, I've had a number of calls from teachers that say we're teaching Chaucer, we're teaching the Bible, we're teaching other materials, Shakespeare, and I'm afraid this bill will put me in jail. It absolutely does not. The bill is very clear that materials, taken as a whole, have value, and they are within the guidelines of educational material. So librarians and teachers have nothing to fear if they're teaching material that as a whole doesn't violate obscenity law. Now, what we do in the bill also is offer some guidance on what materials could be harmful to children and still fall within that range of obscenity. That language provides guidance as to what that is, and it talks about some of the things like nudity and other things that are just inappropriate for children of a certain age. And that's very important because, as you mentioned before, the Craighead County Jonesboro Library had material that parents objected to. And all they asked was that that material be moved to a different section of the library. And if one moved that material out of the children's section to a young adult or an adult section, then one has taken the necessary steps to prevent children from seeing that material. So, I want to stop. I don't want to keep rambling. So can you, any questions or thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to do this as an illustration for those who are watching, so we can talk about like what kind of obscenity we're discussing here. So here's some of the books that are for kids, and I don't mean to make you blush, Senator, but this needs to be out there. We can share this with your screen. So you see this right here. This is obviously childhood animation. I don't know if you can read that. I don't want to read it, but we're literally talking about male and female body parts in children's books, and we can, it is what it is. Then we have this right here. Here is a woman who has had a voluntary mastectomy. Again, normalizing basically LGBT lifestyles for kids. So, I mean, this type of stuff, and it gets worse than this. I mean, these are just a couple of examples. So it's much worse than that. And I guess my question would be, you're obviously going to meet resistance on this because we live in a society today where the LGBT lobby never seems to lose, especially at the national level, right? They're promoted in every aspect of our pop culture, professional sports, Hollywood, the music industry, obviously the government. And so I'm imagining the reaction to this is quite vitriolic, and I'm sure you've probably even, been called pretty terrible names.
Yeah, I'll send you some of those emails later. Uh, you know, let me be clear again. This bill does not address the LGBTQA plus community. This bill addresses the sexualization of children, regardless of what your gender ID or your sex is. It just says that there are certain materials that are sexually inappropriate for young children. And the legislature does not make that decision. A court makes that decision. And parents make those decisions. And one of the biggest things this bill does, Paul, it allows parents and with guardianships and responsibility over kids, it allows them a path to appeal what's in their library, whether it's a public library or a school. So in the public library system, this bill, and we're amending it right now, and some of these amendments have not come out. They should come out next week. But what you're going to see is if a library violates this, they have to have a system up through the library board. And that appeal has to be public. If people are voting, they have to vote publicly. So if a parent says, I'd like this book moved from this section to that section, not banned, and everybody cries banning and all of that, and fascist and Nazi, but we're not banning the book. Most of these cases would just go to a different section of the library. So, for example, if a parent said, I'd like this section book moved 20 feet over to a different section, and the librarian says no, then the parent appeals to the library board, and that board meeting has to be public, and that vote taken publicly. Now, many of our libraries already have a similar system, but this will be codified now that you're going to have that process in place and approved by an independent group and move forward. Now, one can always go further to court if one chooses, but that's not in this bill. And if well, I guess it is, because if the courts find that they have violated the law, then that library will lose funding, state funding, for 1 year. There's no penalty to the librarian. We're not trying to put them in jail, but the library would lose funding for a year if they violate this bill.
Well, and that would be, they would lose funding if, we're talking about they would lose funding if this process isn't followed. But the obscenity part of this, bringing them into these obscenity standards, if they peddle
that's the court.
That's
right.
the court. If they peddle sexual books to kids, and you've got a sheriff or a prosecutor that has their head screwed on straight, and they have the law, we are talking, real world consequences, aren't we?
Yes. Matter of fact, if you violate the obscenity law, I think it's a felony and a year in jail. So my advice is don't violate the obscenity law.
Yes.
And by the way, Paul, that obscenity law applies regardless of your age. It's obscenity, and you can't distribute that. Now, one of the concerns was that what if somebody donates an obscene book and it's back on a shelf? So we've removed that, and you have to be distributing it or potentially distributing it. So if somebody donates a box of 10,000 books and one of them is obscene, you're in possession of obscene material, but you're not distributing it, and no one's accountable.
You made a Facebook post. I sorry to interrupt. You made a Facebook post a couple of maybe a day or so ago, and you was talking about the process behind this bill and people who say they want to sit down at the table and negotiate this. And you seem to indicate from the Facebook post that sometimes people say that, but they don't really mean it. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, yeah, I made a bunch of posts. So what was the complaint? What was the problem?
Well, no, no, no. I mean, the negotiating process with the. Forgive me if I don't know the lobbying group, but
The
yeah,
Arkansas Library
Arkansas
Association.
Library Association, or
Right.
and it seemed to be that the sausage making process of all of this is
Yeah.
the
Yeah,
people.
we sat down with them, and they had some valid points in some of the language and how we could make it more clear. They asked us to remove the penalty for librarians and make it a state funding. That was their suggestion. That's a good suggestion. We took it. We're adding that to the bill. We took some of their language and processes and added that to the bill. I think it made it more clear. We're non-negotiable on the obscenity part. We're not removing that. So if you violate obscenity law, you'll be subject to the court's rendering of what the penalty would be. Does that answer your question?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I just want to thank you for addressing this issue, and this is. I think a lot of us are, just in the process of regrouping.
Right.
In a way, we are reacting to the left and this slide down a very dangerous.
Yeah, parents want to have a part of it. And when we actually polled a whole bunch of librarians, and when I introduce the bill, we'll be doing that. We actually had a librarian at a public library who said if a 6-month-old child came into my library and wanted to check out X-rated movies, I'd let them.
Wow.
So when people say, well, we're of high moral character, I've got 2 master's degrees in this or that, and I need to be able to make that decision, I agree with that. You do. And you are highly qualified. However, you're not highly qualified to say what's appropriate for a parent's child. They are.
Yeah.
And we need to be transparent in that. Matter of fact, I'll segue into the school bill, the school portion of that bill. If you're your children are in public schools, there's a process, and the process, the Arkansas School Board Association has a recommended process. It's a good recommended process. So we're actually going to codify that and make every school in the state present a plan on how they handle parent appeals. And I've had a number, I can't tell you how many emails I've had from school librarians who said essentially that it's their business what happens in their school. I actually had a school, well, I'll come back to that later. So we're going to codify the process.
Well, can you talk a little bit about, I mean, we know what our Bill of Rights is, but there's also a library Bill of Rights.
Amazing,
isn't
it?
Existed.
Yeah, it's from the American Library Association, and they have their Bill of Rights, and they somehow equate their Bill of Rights to our God-given Bill of Rights. And they talk about the First Amendment and how it applies. And by the First Amendment, by making some stretches, they say that the First Amendment means that all children should be, this is actually in their Bill of Rights, that they say all children or all people, regardless of age, gender, sex, or other factors, there should be no limits on what they can see. Hence, you see librarians say that if a 6-month-old came into my library, according to the Library Bill of Rights of the American Library Association, we agree with that. We had that posted on our wall or in our policy, reference that in our policy. If a 6-month-old came in, we would allow them to check out X-rated material.
Unbelievable.
And I'll come back to that in a minute.
Well,
so when we jump over to the school side of this, the Arkansas School Board Association has a recommended policy. We're going to codify that. And every school will have to adopt this policy, have it on file at their school. And it's a good policy. It goes from the librarian to a school committee, then to the school board. You can appeal it all the way up through the school board. The difference would be that right now, if you appeal that at the school level, the principal appoints a committee of 2 or 25, whatever they choose. That committee meets in secret, discusses the book, and then it comes out and says, this is our decision. And again, the appeal may be to move the book 10 feet or 20 feet in order to prevent younger children from seeing what older children can check out. There's certainly some discretion. And if that were your appeal, and that committee in a private, secret meeting said, we're not moving it, that vote will now be public. And that meeting will be, in all those meetings about that book, will be subject to the open meetings law that Arkansas has. Wow. And subject to FOIA. And the committee would not be able to have any conversations about that book in private quietly. All those conversations will have to have open in public and available to the people. Yeah. That's a huge thing. I don't know that a teacher is going to want to be on that committee and vote that way. The last part, Paul, and I'll flip it back to you, is right now, my understanding is that according to state law, librarians are not required to share what a child checks out in the library, either public library or your school. So, and this happened in a conversation with a public school librarian. She says she has an obligation to the student to protect their confidentiality. So if you have a student of one religion who wants to become another religion, and I'll let you talk about what other religions are and their impact and what they do. But if the child is interested in that subject and checks out a couple of books, or maybe they want to identify as a different gender, maybe they want to have surgery, they're checking those books out. If the parent went to the school and said, I'd like to see what my child is checking out, the school librarian and the public librarian are not obligated to tell the parent what their child is seeing. So that's going to be a separate bill.
That's good.
But that bill will be coming out. We're already drafting it. And if a parent doesn't want to see it, the parent will have to opt out. But you are automatically
that could be more of a protection against all kinds of degeneracy, not just the sexual nature or changing religions, but the anarchist cookbook. I don't know if that's a thing that's in public libraries, but stuff like that. Teaching you to literally be terrorists.
And librarians are all for that. The ones I talk to, and they're worried that if parents, the comment was made. Can you imagine what would happen if a parent found out what their child was reading? And that comment was in the context of, oh no. Now the parent knows the child is interested in, fill in the blank. So they're actually taking away the parental obligation for parents to raise their children.
Yes.
That removes that obligation and says a librarian with 1, 2, 3, or 8 degrees is more knowledgeable about how to raise your children than you are. And that's some of the things we're fighting, and I think those bills will pass.
Yeah. In olden days, a glimpse of stocking was looked on as something shocking, but now God knows anything goes. It's much worse than that now, and that's what these librarian philosophies, that's basically what it is. Anything goes. And we have laws where we clearly say things are wrong. Murder, we say, is wrong. You know what? Sexualization of children is wrong. And we can say that, and we can codify that. While I have you here, Senator Dan Sullivan, you're also working on another bill that would end affirmative action hiring practices for state employees. I've seen the headlines. I've seen the headlines talking about how the Legislative Black Caucus is really upset with this. And you've even been called a racist, I understand, or they're trying to call you a racist. Tell us a little bit about that and where this bill is.
Well, I was called a racist long before that. I tell people I worked in several fields in schools and in the private sector and managed thousands of people, and was never, you had people call you that, but it was never, no one ever said, yeah, he is. And I was often sought out because of how fairly I treated people. And I said in the Black Caucus meeting the other day, the first time I was ever labeled a racist was when I became a legislator. But be that as it may, Senate Bill 21 actually expands the population under which one would qualify for needs. Right now, we have a list, I think it's about 6 or 8 groups by profile that say you are eligible for special consideration. You have a carve-out special consideration based upon your heritage, your race, your gender. There are about 6 different categories. What this bill does is actually make you eligible for a hand up or assistance based on your circumstance. You know, Supreme Court Justice Roberts said in, I think it was 2007, that will never end racial discrimination with racial discrimination. That's a starting point for me. I believe that. Justice Sandra Day O'Connor said in 2003 that we're making good progress, and in 20 or 22, 3 years or so, there'll be no more need for affirmative action based upon those categories. Is there a need for people to have assistance and a hand up? Yes. Is our society willing to help people who have a special need? Yes. So a good example is the Women's Minority Health Group. They talked to me the other day about how Black women and Black children, babies, are dying in Arkansas at the highest rate in the nation. True. Is that population in need of assistance? Yes. So under this bill, they would still qualify. They're not removed. They just qualify based upon their need, not based upon their race. So we're going to actually expand that group of eligibility, but it's now based on need, not your immutable characteristics of race or sex.
Senator Dan Sullivan, thank you so much for coming on the Conservative Arkansas Media. We really appreciate it, and really appreciate the work that you're doing. And if you want to come back on and let us know about these bills when the library bill passes, I hope it does pass. I mean, that needs to be a celebration because we do need to protect.
Absolutely. And you know, Paul, it's groups like yours who help us get the message out, and we're turning the tide. You know, let me jump back to affirmative action for a minute. Realize that Arkansas now has a woman governor who ran against a minority, an African American. We have a lieutenant governor who is a woman and who employs African Americans. We have, and the gentleman who ran for governor, his brother, also an African American, ran for lieutenant governor's position. We have an African American is president of the largest university system in the state. There are a lot of good things going on. And people who need a helping hand, we're very willing as a state to help people. But we're not going to categorize them as they have been. We're going to categorize them based on their need. And I'm so proud of our governor. Look forward to all the things she's going to achieve. I saw her response at the State of the Union, had a private meeting with her and some of her staff, gave us a preview of what's going to happen, and I am so excited for our state. Thank you for your assistance in that.
No, I'm very excited too. And this week she did an amazing job rebutting Joe Biden, and it was a breath of fresh air considering how depressing Joe Biden's speech was, and the fact that it was essentially, some sort of fake MAGA speech, and you saw these Democrats standing up for America First ideas that were stolen. It's so that whole thing was so frustrating to me. Senator Dan Sullivan, really appreciate it, sir. Thanks so much.
Thank you.